everyone. This is Reverend Dr. Roger Paul, and tonight we're going to study paper 69, which is Primitive Human Institutions, as soon as I get to the podium here. And that starts on page 772.1 in the Urantia book. So let's get started. Father, thank you for bringing us together tonight and helping us understand this wonderful revelation. Pray that you'll open our hearts and minds that we might absorb some of this and share it with others. We thank you and we give you the praise in your Son, Jesus, Michael, and everyone. Amen.
Mm-hmm.
And dear, would you like to start out?
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Paper 69, Primitive Human Institutions. Emotionally, man transcends his animal ancestors in his ability to appreciate humor, art, and religion. Socially, man exhibits his superiority in that he is a tool maker, a communicator, and an institution builder.
Okay, so we are a little bit higher than the animals, even though we act like animals, right? When human beings long maintain social groups, such aggregations always result in the creation of certain activity trends which culminate in institutionalization. Most of man's institutions have proved to be labor-saving while at the same time contributing something to the enhancement of group security. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. Millie, would you take the next one, please?
Yes. Civilized man takes great pride in the character, stability, and continuity of his established institutions, but all human institutions are merely the accumulated mores of the past as they have been conserved by taboos and dignified by religion. Such legacies become traditions, and traditions ultimately metamorphose into conventions.
Okay, so all these things, all these mores we think are important, the things that we have developed over time are basically institutions that came about by people accepting that's the way to do things, okay? And that's the same way when like in the early Jewish traditions, when they had 600 and something laws, these were just traditions that had been passed down from generation to generation. And they become the mores of that time. And as time goes on, these taboos and things like that are dignified by a religion. In other words, somebody in a religious organization, like the priest says, this is sin and this is not, basically. So the things that we might consider bad and sin may be not sinful at all, really. It's just
Like a mortal sin of not saying your evening prayers or your morning prayers.
that's right. That's right. Those sort of things are not all that we crack them up to be. All right. Rodney, would you take the next one, please?
Yes, sir. You guys forgive me, I've got a bit of a sore throat. Okay, number one, basic human institutions. All human institutions minister to some social need, past or present, notwithstanding that their overdevelopment unfailingly detracts from the worthwhileness of the individual in that personality is overshadowed and initiative is diminished. Man should control his institutions rather than permit himself to be dominated by these creations while advancing civilization.
Okay, so it's more important for us to grow as an individual, our personality grows, than to go out of your way to let these institutions or these wars control you. Okay? So the personality,
Jesus taught that.
that's right. Personality is divine, right? So, we should be able to make decisions for our own human self. All right?
Human institutions are three general classes. 1. The institutions of self-maintenance. These institutions embrace those practices growing out of food hunger and its associated instincts of self-preservation. They include industry, property, war for gain, and all the regulative machinery of society. Sooner or later, the fear instinct fosters the establishment of these institutions of survival by means of taboo, convention, and religious sanction. But fear, ignorance, and superstition have played a prominent part in the early origin and subsequent development of all human institutions.
Isn't it funny? It's our fear, our ignorance, and superstitions that control us most. Kind of ridiculous. That's what it is. My little battery's blinking already. The institution of self-perpetuation. These are the establishments of society growing out of sex hunger, maternal instinct, and the higher tender emotions of the races. They embrace the social safeguards of the home and the school, family life, education, ethics, and religion. They include marriage customs, war for defense, and home building. That's number 2. Millie, would you take the next one, please?
Number 3, the institutions of self-gratification. These are the practices growing out of vanity, proclivities, and pride emotions, and they embrace customs in dress and personal adornment, social usage, war for glory, dancing, amusement games, and other phases of sensual gratification. But civilization has never evolved distinctive institutions of self-gratification.
In other words, they come along milly, right?
Oh. You know that, Roger? This was, back in 1930. I wonder if civilization has evolved distinctive institutions of self-gratification now.
Well, I'll tell you what, the generations today spend a lot more time and energy on self-gratification than they ever have.
I'm thinking of like video games.
Video games,
Exercise,
dancing,
fun things.
yeah, lots of things like that. This first generation was really good. You take the next one, Robert?
Yes. These three groups of social practices are intimately interrelated and minutely interdependent the one upon the other. On Ratchet, they represent a complex organization which functions as a single social mechanism.
So you put all three of these together and you have society, right?
Yes.
That's how society comes about.
2. The dawn of industry. Primitive industry slowly grew up as an insurance against the terrors of famine. Early in his existence, man began to draw lessons from some of the animals that during a harvest of plenty store up food against the days of scarcity.
So by watching the animals, we see how to store food for the future.
Like a squirrel.
Like a
Yeah.
squirrel. Before the dawn of early frugality and primitive industry, the lot of the average tribe was one of destitution and real suffering. Early men had to compete with the whole animal world for his food. Competition, gravity, ever pulls man down toward the beast level. Poverty is his natural and tyrannical estate. Wealth is not a natural gift. It results from labor, knowledge, and organization. So you have to work to become wealthy, any way you look at it. food-wise or anything else.
Primitive man was not slow to recognize the advantages of association. Association led to organization, and the first result of organization was division of labor, with its immediate saving of time and materials. These specializations of labor arose by adaptation to pressure, pursuing the paths of lesser resistance. Primitive savages never did any real work cheerfully or willingly. With them, conformity was due to the coercion of necessity.
We haven't changed very much on that one, have we? Rodney, would you take the next one?
Primitive man disliked hard work, and he would not hurry unless confronted by great danger. The prime element in labor, the idea of doing a given task within a certain time limit, is entirely a modern notion. The ancients were never rushed. It was the double demands of the intense struggle for existence and the ever-advancing standards of living that drove the naturally inactive races of early man into avenues of industry.
They were never in a hurry to do anything.
Labor, the efforts of design, distinguishes man from the beast, whose exertions are largely instinctive. The necessity for labor is man's paramount blessing. The prince's staff all worked. They did much to ennoble physical labor on Urantia. Adam was a gardener. The God of the Hebrews labored. Adam was a gardener. The God of the Hebrews labored. He was the creator and upholder of all things. The Hebrews were the first tribe to put a supreme premium on industry. They were the first people to decree that he who does not work shall not eat. But many of the religions of the world reverted to the early ideal of idleness. Jupiter was a reveler, and Buddha became a reflective devotee of leisure. Not another one.
See how that
I love
doesn't
being
work.
there.
The Sanghi tribes were fairly industrious when residing away from the tropics, but there was a long struggle between the lazy devotees of magic and the apostles of work, those who exercised foresight. So they would much rather lay around and do nothing and magically get fed than have to work for it. Right? Millie.
Yes, the first human foresight was directed toward the preservation of fire, water, and food. But primitive man was a natural-born gambler. He always wanted to get something for nothing. And all too often, during those early times, the success with which accrued from the patient practice was attributed to charms. Magic was slow to give way before foresight, self-denial, and industry.
Okay, and this is a picture of men gambling.
What is that?
That's a picture of men gambling. See, they're holding cards and stuff. They'd much rather gamble than have to work for something.
Oh, weird. Number 3, the specialization of labor. The divisions of labor in primitive society were determined first by natural and then by social circumstances. The early order of specialization in labor was: number 1, the specialization based on sex. Women's work was derived from the selective presence of the child. Women naturally love babies more than men do. Thus, woman became the routine worker, while man became the hunter and fighter, engaging in accentuated periods of work and rest.
So they worked a lot, but they rested a lot too. But women worked all the time. And that's what a picture of this is. And men goofing off and hunting and stuff, and women working.
All down through the ages, the taboos have operated to keep woman strictly in her own field. Man has most selfishly chosen the more agreeable work, leaving the routine drudgery to woman. Man has always been ashamed to do woman's work, but woman has never shown any reluctance to doing man's work. But strange to record, both men and women have always worked together in building and furnishing the home.
So they all work together. Modification subsequent upon age and disease, these differences determine the next division of labor. The old men and cripples were early set to work making tools and weapons. They were later assigned to building irrigation works. So when you couldn't stand up, and they put you sitting down and working on something that way. Really.
3. Differentiation based on religion. The medicine men were the first human beings to be exempted from physical toil. They were the pioneer professional class. The smiths were a small group who competed with the medicine men as magicians. Their skill in working with metals made the people afraid of them. The white smiths and the black smiths gave origin to the early belief in white and black magic, and this belief later became involved in the superstition of good and bad ghosts, good and bad spirits.
So the black and white smiths competed with medicine. Right?
Smiths were the first non-religious group to enjoy special privileges. They were regarded as naturals during war, neutrals during war, and this extra leisure led to their becoming, as a class, the politicians of primitive society. But through gross abuse of these privileges, the Smiths became universally hated, and medicine men lost no time in fostering hatred for their competitors. In this first contest between science and religion, superstition, won. After being driven out of the villages, the Smiths maintained the first inns, public lodging houses, on the outskirts of the settlements.
So they drove them out of town, and they became innkeepers, right, for people.
To me it sounds like, one village, or this sort of happened at different times in a period?
Well, it happened over a period of time, Rodney, and it happened many villages at the same time. You know?
So, I mean,
Because they were non-religious, it was more a superstition type thing, right? That people were afraid of them because they, like the blacksmiths, would mold hot metal, and the natives were always afraid of the sight of hot metal. You know, it was just a superstition.
4. Master and slave. The next differentiation of labor grew out of the relations of the conqueror to the conquered, and that meant the beginning of human slavery.
Now keep in mind, this Melchizedek is relating this as it happened, right? He's not making any judgment whether slavery was good or bad, or well, he does at one point. But I want to make sure that you understand he's just quoting what happens, okay? All right, differentiation based on diverse physical and mental endowments, further divisions of labor, were favored by the inherent differences in men. All human beings are not born equal. That's probably as plain as you can put it, isn't it? So, contrary to what you believe, all men aren't born equal. Some of them have more talent, more skill, and
More physical endurance.
more physical endurance,
and more advantage,
and more advantage.
you
That's
know,
right.
and maybe wealthy.
That's right.
The early specialists in industry were the flint flakers and the stonemasons. Next came the smiths. Subsequently, group specialization developed. Whole families and clans dedicated themselves to certain sorts of labor. The origin of one of the earliest castes of priests, apart from the tribal medicine men, was due to the superstitious exaltation of a family of expert sword makers.
Because swords were very important, right? So they raised them as a class. The first group specialists in industry were the rock salt exporters and potters. Women made the plain pottery and men the fancy. Among some tribes, sewing and weaving were done by women and others by men. Really?
The early traders were women. They were employed as spies, carrying on commerce as a sideline. Presently, trade expanded, the women acting as intermediaries or jobbers. Then came the merchant class, charging a commission profit for their services. Growth of group barter developed into commerce, and following the exchange of commodities came the exchange of skilled labor.
Number 4, the beginnings of trade. Just as marriage by contract followed marriage by capture, so trade by barter followed seizure by raids. But a long period of piracy intervened between the early practices of silent barter and the later trade by modern exchange methods.
Interesting. Even piracy had its place.
The first barter was conducted by armed traders who would leave their goods on a neutral spot. Women held the first markets. They were the earliest traders, and this was because they were the burden bearers. The men were warriors. Very early, the trading counter was developed, a wall wide enough to prevent the traders reaching each other with weapons.
So basically, they were separated, right? A fetish was used to stand guard over the deposits of goods for silent barter. Such marketplaces were secure against theft. Nothing would be removed except by barter or purchase. With a fetish on guard, the goods were always safe. The early traders were scrupulously honest within their own tribe, but regarded it as all right to cheat distant strangers. Even the early Hebrews recognized a separate code of ethics in dealing with the Gentiles. It was okay to cheat your neighbor, your stranger neighbors, but not your well-known neighbors.
These were the kinds of things that the people did not want to give up when the disciples started teaching what Jesus taught.
That's right. That's right.
For ages, silent barter continued before men would meet unarmed on the sacred marketplace. These same market squares became the first places of sanctuary, and in some countries were later known as cities of refuge. Any fugitive reaching the marketplace was safe and secure against attack.
Isn't that interesting? That may have been where the church got it too. And then it's the marketplace.
The first weights were grains of wheat and of cereal. The first medium of exchange was a fish or a goat. Later, the cow became a unit of barter.
And this is a picture of grain weights.
Modern writing originated in the early trade records. The first literature of man was a trade promotion document, a salt advertisement. Many of the earlier wars were fought over natural deposits such as flint, salt, and metals. The first formal tribal treaty concerned the intertribalizing of a salt deposit. These treaty spots afforded opportunity for friendly and peaceful interchange of ideas and intermingling of various tribes.
Modern writing originated in the early trade reference. The first literature of man was a trait. You just
Writing
read that.
progressed.
Hang on. It's not. Right. Excuse me. Writing progressed up through the stages of the message stem. Knottings, chords, picture writing, hieroglyphics, and wampum belts. To the early symbolic alphabets, message sending evolved from the primitive smoke signal up through runners, animal riders, railroads, and airplanes, as well as the telegraph, telephone, and wireless communication. Isn't it interesting that wireless communication was not developed in 1934, 1935?
They had radio, didn't they?
Yeah, they had radio, but not wireless communication as we know it today.
Yeah,
This is the smoke signal. Oops. Give me a second. I'm struggling. Okay. Smoke signal. And this is Egyptian hieroglyphics. And this is a key for deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphics. We have another example. This is the black sarcophagus. So it's about the 26th dynasty, about 530 BC.
Was it like a chalkboard?
No, that's writing on the side of a tube, basically, telling a story. You can read from this little box later if you'd like to read the story. All right, this is a menu, believe it or not, and basically how to decipher hieroglyphics. These are the same thing here. And this is the idea of hearing is shown in the art picture of the human ear. Kings who were meant to listen, the concerns of their subjects were presented statues of unnaturally large ears. Model ears were also dedicated to the gods. That's that stone ears up there. And this is another key to the Egyptian hieroglyphics. Same thing. And more of it. Okay, let's go on.
Okay, new ideas and better methods were carried around the inhabited world by ancient traders. Commerce, linked with adventure, led to exploration and discovery, and all of these gave birth to transportation. Commerce has been the great civilizer through promoting the cross-fertilization of culture.
And it still is today, isn't it?
Yeah, great.
Rodney.
Well, number 5, the beginnings of capital. Capital is labor applied as a
Renunciation.
creation of the present in favor of the future. Savings represent the form of maintenance and survival insurance. Food hoarding developed self-control and created the first problems of capital and labor. A man who had food, provided he could protect it from robbers, had a distinct advantage over the man who had no food.
Makes sense.
The early banker was the valorous man of the tribe. He held the group treasures on deposit while the entire clan would defend his hut in event of attack.
Mm.
Thus, the accumulation of individual capital and growth to wealth, group wealth immediately led to military organization. At first, such precautions were designed to defend property against foreign raiders, but later on it became the custom to keep the military organization in practice by inaugurating raids on the property and wealth of neighboring tribes.
So other tribes would invade them, and then they would invade someone else and take all their property. The basic heritage led to the accumulation of capital were: 1. Hunger associated with foresight. Food saving and preservation meant power and comfort for those who possess sufficient foresight, thus to provide for future needs. Food storage was adequate insurance against famine and disaster. And the entire body of primitive mores was really designed to help man subordinate the present to the future. Billy. Billy? Turn your mic back on, Billy.
Turn the mic on. 2. Love of family. Desire to provide for their wants. Capital represents the saving of property in spite of the pressure of the wants of today in order to ensure against the demands of the future. A part of this future need may have to do with one's posterity.
Number 3, vanity. Longing to display one's property accumulations. Extra clothing was one of the first badges of distinction. Collection vanity early appealed in the pride of man.
So if you had more than one
Right.
change in clothes, you were considered fortunate, right?
4. Position. Eagerness to buy social and political prestige. There early sprang up a commercialized nobility, admission to which depended on the performance of some special service to royalty, or was granted frankly for the payment of money.
Yeah, so if you wanted to be special, if you had good money, you just pay for it, right?
Hmm.
5, power. The craving to be master. Treasure lending was carried on as a means of enslavement, 100% a year being the loan rate of these ancient times.
Hmm.
The moneylenders made themselves kings by creating a standing army of debtors. Bondservants were among the early forms of property to be accumulated. In olden days, debt slavery extended even to the control of the body after death.
Yeah.
I guess they repossessed your body if you didn't pay them. Okay?
6. Fear of the ghost of the dead. Priest fees for protection. Men early began to give death presents to the priest with a view of having their property used to facilitate their progress through the next life. The priesthoods thus became very rich. They were chief among the ancient capitalists.
All right, so you want to make sure you get to the other side, right? You just pay the priest, right?
That's important.
Yeah.
Number 7, sex urge. The desire to find young or wives. Man's first form of trading was women exchange, or woman exchange. It long preceded horse trading, but never did the border in sex slaves advance society. Such traffic was and is a racial disgrace, for at one and the same time it hindered the development of family life and polluted the biological fitness of superior peoples.
How could it hinder the development of family life? If you had a wife and you had a bunch of kids and you traded her off to somebody else, then who's going to take care of your kids, right?
Yeah, destroyed the family.
That's right. So it destroys the family. That's right.
8. Numerous forms of self-gratification. Some sought wealth because it conferred power, others toiled for property because it meant ease. Early man, and some later day ones, tended to squander his resources on luxury. Intoxicants and drugs intrigued the primitive races.
People do that today still, right? As civilization developed, men acquired new incentives for saving. New ones were rapidly adding to the original few hungry. Poverty becomes so abhorred that only the rich were supposed to go direct to heaven when they died. Property became so highly valued that it gave a pretentious feast would wipe out and dishonor from one's name.
Curious. Okay. Accumulations of wealth early became the badge of social distinction. Individuals in certain tribes would accumulate property for years just to create an impression by burning it up on some holiday or by freely distributing it to fellow tribesmen. This made them great men. Even modern peoples reveled in the lavish distribution of Christmas gifts, while rich men endow great institutions of philanthropy and learning. Man's technique varies, but his disposition remains quite unchanged.
Please move. Rodney.
But it is only fair to report that many an ancient rich man distributed much of his fortune because of the fear of being killed by those who coveted his treasures. Wealthy men commonly sacrificed scores of slaves to show disdain for wealth.
Didn't do much for the slave, though, did it?
Though capital has tended to liberate man, it has greatly complicated his social and industrial organization. The abuse of capital by unfair capitalists does not destroy the fact that it is the basis of modern industrial society. Through capital and invention, the present generation enjoys a higher degree of freedom than any that ever preceded it on earth. This is placed on record as a fact, and not in justification of the many misuses of capital by thoughtless and selfish custodians.
Remember, Jesus had a long discussion about capital in his teaching. Fire in relation to civilization. Primitive society, with its four divisions, industrial, regulative, religious, and military, rose to the instrumentality of fire, animals, slaves, and property. Really?
Yeah, okay. Fire building by a single bound forever separated man from animal. It is the basic human invention or discovery. Fire enabled man to stay on the ground at night, as all animals are afraid of it. Fire encouraged eventide social intercourse. It not only protected against cold and wild beasts, but it also employed as security against ghosts. It was at first used more for light than heat. Many backward tribes refused to sleep unless a flame burned all night.
Fire was a great civilizer, providing man with his first means of being altruistic without loss by enabling him to give life force to a neighbor without depriving himself. The household fire, which was attended by the mother and eldest daughter, was the first educated, requiring watchfulness and dependability. The early home was not a building, but the family gathered about the fire, the family hearth. When a son found a new home, he carried a firebrand from the family hearth.
Though Andon, the discoverer of fire, avoided treating it as an object of worship, many of his descendants regarded the flame as a fetish or as a spirit. They failed to reap the sanity benefits of fire because they would not burn refuge. Primitive man feared fire and always sought to keep it in good humor, hence the sprinkling of incense. Under no circumstances would the ancients spit in a fire, nor would they ever pass between anyone and a burning fire. Even the iron pyrites and pyrites and flints used in striking fire were held sacred by early mankind.
Kind of funny that priests still use incense as they go down through the Catholic Church.
Right.
It was a sin to extinguish a flame. If a hut caught fire, it was allowed to burn. The fires of the temples and the shrines were sacred and were never permitted to go out except for that which was the custom to kindle new flames annually or after some calamity. Women were selected as priests because they were custodians of the home fires.
Interesting. Today they won't let women be priests.
Yeah.
The early myths about how fire came down from the gods grew out of the observation of fire caused by lightning. These ideas of supernatural origins led directly to fire worship, and fire worship led to the custom of passing through fire, a practice carried on up to the times of Moses. and there still persists the idea of passing through a fire after death. The fire myth was a great bond in early times and still persists in the symbolism of the Pharisees. Who are the Pharisees at this time?
Pharisees.
It doesn't say Pharisees,
It says Pharisees?
it says
There's
Pharisees.
Pharisees.
Parsi.
Pharisees.
Pharisees.
Well, but it's-
2 syllables.
Can't tell you that. I'd have to look it up.
Fire led to cooking, and raw eaters became a term of derision, and quickly lessened the expenditure of vital energy necessary for the digestion of food, and so left early man some strength for social culture, while animal husbandry, by reducing effort necessary to secure food, provided time for social activities.
It should be remembered that fire opened the doors to metalwork and led to the subsequent discovery of steam power and the present-day uses of electricity.
One thing better than another. The utilization of animals. To start with, the entire animal world was man's enemy. Human beings had to learn to protect themselves from the beasts. First man ate the animals, but later learned to domesticate them and make them serve him.
The domestication of animals came about accidentally. The savage would hunt herds much as the American Indians hunted bison. By surrounding the herd, they could keep control of the animals, thus being able to kill them as they were required by food. Later, corrals were constructed and entire herds would be captured.
This is a stone that has gazelles drawn on the surface, one circling the other. The stone was found in a circular wall which formed a structure either as a trap by hunters to catch wild animals or a safe place where farmers could protect their domesticated herds. Was the stone decorated with a good luck charm for a successful hunt or for a wealthy herd? This is about 6200 BC.
Okay. It was easy to tame some animals, but like the elephant, many of them would not reproduce in captivity. Still further on, it was discovered that certain species of animals would submit to man's presence, and that they would reproduce in captivity. The domestication of animals was thus promoted by selective breeding, an art which has made great progress incidents of Dalmatia.
So it was the Dalmatians that taught him how to do this.
The dog was the first animal to be domesticated, and the difficult experience of taming it began when a certain dog, after following a hunter around all day, actually went home with him. For ages, dogs were used for food, hunting, transportation, and companionship. At first, dogs only howled, but later on they learned to bark. The dog's keen sense of smell led to the notion it could see spirits, and thus arose the dog fetish cults. The employment of watchdogs made it first possible for the whole clan to sleep at night. It then became the custom to employ watchdogs to protect the home against spirits as well as material enemies. When the dog barked, man or beast approached, but when the dog howled, spirits were near. Even now, many still believe that a dog's howling at night betokens death.
When man was a hunter, he was fairly kind to women, but after the domestication of animals, coupled with the Caligastan confusion, many tribes shamefully treated their women. They treated them altogether too much as they treated their animals. Man's brutal treatment of women constitutes one of the darkest chapters of human history.
Slavery, number 8, slavery as a factor in civilization. Primitive man never hesitated to enslave his fellows. Woman was the first slave, a family slave. Pastoral man enslaved woman as his inferior sex partner. This sort of sex slavery grew directly out of man's decreased dependence upon woman.
Not long ago, enslavement was the lot of those military captives who refused to accept the conqueror's religion. In early times, captives were either eaten, tortured to death, set to fighting each other, sacrificed to spirits, or enslaved. Slavery was a great advancement over massacre and cannibalism.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Enslavement was a forward step in the merciful treatment of war captives. The ambush of Aya, with the wholesale slaughter of men, women, and children, only the king being saved to gratify the conqueror's vanity, is a faithful picture of the barbaric slaughter practiced by even supposedly civilized peoples. The raid upon Og, the king of
Sure.
Bashan, was equally brutal and effective. The Hebrews utterly destroyed their enemies, taking all their property as spoils. They put all cities under tribute on pain of the destruction of all males. But many of the contemporary tribes, those having less tribal egotism, had long since begun to practice the adoption of superior captives.
Okay, so even up to the time of Melchizedek, the Hebrews were destroying every man, woman, and child they conquered. The city.
Well, Abraham did that, didn't he?
Yep. The hunter, like the American Red Man, did not enslave. He either adopted or killed his captives. Slavery was not prevalent among the pastoral peoples, for they needed few laborers. And more, the herders made a practice of killing all men captives and taking as slaves only the women and children. Mosaic code contains specific direction for making wives of these women captives. If not satisfactory, they could be sent away. But the Hebrews were not allowed to sell such rejected consorts as slaves. That was at least one advance in civilization. Though the social standards of the Hebrews were crude, they were far above those of the surrounding tribes.
The herders were the first capitalists. Their herds represented capital, and they lived on the interest, the natural increase, and they were disinclined to trust this wealth to the keeping of either slaves or women. But later on, they took male prisoners and forced them to cultivate the soil. This is the early origin of serfdom, man attached to the land. The Africans could easily be taught to till the soil, hence they became great slave race.
Slavery was an indispensable link in the chain of human civilization. It was the bridge which society passed from chaos and idleness to order and civilized activities. It compelled backward and lazy peoples to work and thus provide wealth and leisure for the social advancement of their superiors.
The institution of slavery compelled man to invent the regulative mechanism of primitive society. It gave origin to the beginnings of government. Slavery demands strong regulation, and during the European Middle Ages virtually disappeared because the feudal lords could not control the slaves. The backward tribes of ancient times, like the native Australians of today, never had slaves.
True slavery was oppressive, but it was the schools of oppression that man learned industry. Eventually the slaves shared the blessings of the higher society which they had so unwillingly helped create. Slavery creates an organization of culture and social achievement, but soon insidious attacks society internally as the gravest of all destructive social maladies. And this is a picture of the slave trade. Says the transatlantic slave trade is often known as the triangular trade. Europeans took goods to Africa and exchanged them for captives who were then taken to the Americas to work on plantations. The commodity produced were then taken back to Europe, then the cycle started again.
Hmm.
These are neck rings that were put around slaves when they were taken in ships and things like that. And this is, sorry, come on. This is the African Steamship Company medallion found in the mid 1800s. The African Steamship Company sailed regularly to West Africa, brought slaves back. And this is some of the medallions in there. Who's that? Me?
I am.
Really?
Modern mechanical invention rendered the slave obsolete. Slavery, like polygamy, is passing because it does not pay, but it has always provided it has always proved disastrous suddenly to liberate a great number of slaves. Less trouble ensued when they were gradually emancipated.
But murder not slaves, but thousands allow ambition to enslave them to death. Involuntary slavery has given way to a new and improved form of modified industrial servitude.
Now we're slaves to things, right?
While the idea of society is universal freedom, idleness should never be tolerated. All able-bodied persons should be compelled to do at least a self-sustaining amount of work.
I agree.
Modern society is in reverse. Slavery has nearly disappeared. Domesticated animals are passing. Civilization is reaching back to fire and inorganic world for power. Man came up from slavery by way of fire animals, and slavery today has reached back, discarding the help of slaves and the assistance of animals, while he seeks to wrest new secrets and sources of wealth and power from the elemental storehouse of nature.
Number 9, private property. While primitive society was virtually communal, primitive man did not adhere to the modern doctrine of communism. The communism of these early times was not a mere theory of social doctrine. It was a simple and practical automatic adjustment. Communism prevented pauperism and want. Begging and prostitution were almost unknown among these ancient tribes.
Primitive communism did not especially level men down, nor did it exalt mediocrity, but it did put a premium on inactivity and idleness, and it did stifle industry and destroy ambition. Communism was indispensable scaffolding in the growth of primitive society, but it gave way to the evolution of a higher social order because it ran counter to full, strong human proclivities.
Yeah, in other words, this is why communism did not last, right?
1. Family. Man not only craves to accumulate property, he desires to bequeath his capital goods to his progeny. But in early communal society, a man's capital was either immediately consumed or distributed among the group at his death. There was no inheritance of property. The inheritance tax was 100%. The later capital accumulation and property inheritance wars were a distinct social advance. But this is true notwithstanding the subsequent growth abuses attendant upon the misuse of capital.
2. Religious tendencies. Primitive man also wanted to save up property as a nucleus for starting life in the next existence. This motive explains why so long accustomed to bury a man's personal belongings with him. The ancients believed that only the rich survive death with any immediate pleasure and dignity. The teachers of revealed religion, more especially the Christian teachers, were the first to proclaim that the poor could have salvation on equal terms with the rich. Jesus was very good at this.
Number 3, the desire for liberty and leisure. In the early days of social evolution, the apportionment of individual earnings among the group was virtually a form of slavery. The worker was made slave to the idler. This was the suicidal weakness of communism. The improvident habitually lived off the thrifty. Even in modern times, the improvident depend on the state, thrifty taxpayers, to take care of them. Those who have no capital still expect those who have to feed them.
Number 4, urge for security and power. Communism was finally destroyed by the subtraction of progressive and successful individuals who resorted to diverse subterfuges, what's that word?
Subterfuges.
Subterfuges in an effort to escape enslavement to the shiftless idlers of their tribes. But at first, all hoarding was secret. Primitive insecurity prevented the outward accumulation of capital. And even at a later time, it was most dangerous to amass too much wealth. The king would be sure to trump up some charge for confiscating a rich man's property. And when a wealthy man died, the funeral was held up until the family donated a large sum to public welfare or to the king, an inheritance tax.
It's great to be king, isn't it?
In earliest times, women were the property of the community, and the mother dominated the family. The early chiefs owned all the land and were proprietors of all the women. Marriage required the consent of the tribal ruler. With the passing of communism, women were held individually, and the father gradually assumed domestic control. Thus the home had its beginning, and the prevailing
Polygamous.
customs were gradually displaced by monogamy. Polygamy is the survival of the female slavery element in marriage. Monogamy is the slave-free idea of the matchless association of one man and one woman in the exquisite enterprise of home building, offspring rearing, mutual culture, and self-improvement.
At first, all property, including tools and weapons, was the common possession of the tribe. Private property first consisted of all things personally touched. If a stranger drank from a cup, the cup was henceforth his. Next, any place where blood was shed became the property of the injured person or group.
Private property was thus originally respected because it was supposed to be charged with some part of the owner's personality. Property honesty rested safely on this type of superstition. No police were needed to guard personal belongings. There was no stealing within the group, though men did not hesitate to appropriate the goods of other tribes. Property relations did not end with death. Early personal effects were burned, then buried with the dead, and later inherited by the surviving family or by the tribe.
The elemental type of personal effects originated in the wearing of charms. Vanity plus fear led pretty man to resist all attempts to relieve him of his favorite charms, such property being valued above necessities.
Sleeping space was one of man's earliest properties. Later home sites were assigned by the tribal chiefs who held all real estate in trust for the group. Presently, a fire site conferred ownership, and still later, a well-constituted title to the adjacent land.
Water holes and wells were among the first private possessions. The whole fetish practice was utilized to guard water holes, wells, trees, crops, and honey. Following the loss of faith in the fetish, laws were evolved to protect private belongings. The game laws, the right to hunt along preceding land laws. The American red man never understood private ownership of land. He could not comprehend the white man's view.
Private property was early marked by family insignia, and thus is the early origin of family crest. Real estate could also be put under the watch care of spirits. The priest would consecrate a piece of land, and it would then rest under the protection of the magic taboos erected thereon. Owners thereof were said to have a priest title. The Hebrews had great respect for these family landmarks. Cursed be he who removes his neighbor's landmark. These stone markers bore the priest's initials. Even trees, when initialed, became private property.
Okay, and this is a landmark, basically, of those early times. The Hebrews. And these are signs of ownership. It says both of these stamp seals were found still attached to the packages. They represent the early use of seals showing ownership of properties. And this is about 6,000 to 5,000 BC.
Okay, in early days, only the crops were private, but successive crops conferred title. Agriculture was thus the genesis of the private ownership of land. Individuals were first given only a life tenureship. At death, land reverted to the tribe. The very first land titles granted by tribes to individuals were graves and the grounds. In later times, land belonged to those who fenced it. But the cities always reserved certain lands for public pasturage and for the use in case of siege. These commons represented the survival of the earlier form of collective ownership.
Eventually, the state assigned property to the individual, reserving the right of taxation. Having made secure their titles, landlords could collect rents, and land became a source of income, capital. Finally, land became truly negotiable, with sales, transfers, mortgages, and foreclosures.
And this is it's called a stone crudery. It's a document recording the purchase of land by a royal officer. It says the value is given in silver, but was paid in the form of a chariot, equipment, clothing, animals, and food. Curses are invoked on anyone who attempts to invalidate the sale or damage the stone. It says the name of the stone was the establisher of the boundary forever. Private ownership brought increased liberty and enhanced stability, but private ownership of land was given social sanction only after communal control and direction had failed, and it was soon followed by a succession of slaves, serfs, and landless classes. But improved machinery is gradually setting man free from slavish toil.
The right to property is not absolute, it is purely social. But all government, law, order, civil rights, social liberties, conventions, peace, and happiness, as they are enjoyed by modern people, have grown up around the private ownership of property.
The present social order is not necessarily right, not divine or sacred. Mankind would do well to move slowly in making changes. That which you have is vastly better than any system known to your ancestors. Make certain that when you change the social order, you change for the better. Do not be persuaded to experiment with the discarded formulas of your forefathers. Go forward, not backward. Let evolution proceed, not take a backward step. Presented by Melchizedek of Nebada.
What are they talking about? Do not take a backward step. Talking about communism, aren't they? Yeah, so we need to go forward. Okay, let's have a little.
And slaves.
Yeah, in slavery. Sweetie, would you like to close?
Dear Heavenly Father, Mother God, we thank you so much for this lesson tonight, and help us to ponder it and consider it and dwell on it and learn it really well and to pass it on to others as best we can. We thank you for this opportunity to gather together and to learn and to grow and to come to deeper understandings of the evolutionary process and the paths that has already taken place that helps us to understand where we came from and how everything has evolved. It is in your name, Jesus, we always give praise and glory. Amen.
Thank you for joining us. Please come to the screen. Thank you at home for joining us also. Lots and lots more people reading, listening to our messages. And I want to thank those who join us that way too. Appreciate you tuning in.